Hello and welcome to this Frontline webinar on Operation Sindoor, its fallout, and whether this has isolated India. 7 delegations of Indian parliamentarians and officials cutting across party lines have visited 33 countries, seeking the support of these countries, their understanding for the actions India took between May 7th and May 10th. 4 days that really shook the subcontinent, if not the rest of the world. What was the need to send these delegations abroad? How successful have they been? And what are the gains that we have made from sending these delegations? There's a wide variety of opinion out there. Whether it's good, it shows India's unity. There have been also multi-religious delegations apart from multi-party delegations, probably the Modi government wanting to make a point. So these are all issues that are of concern, of interest. The government always has told us that Pakistan is already a terrorist state. It's an isolated state. So the question does arise, what was the need to send so many delegations to so many countries then? To discuss this issue on this Frontline webinar, I'm joined by Nidhi Razdan, a well-known TV personality. She writes a weekly column for Gulf News and also hosts a weekly program on the Decoder app on Donald Trump. I'm also joined by Angshuman Choudhury, a doctoral scholar at NUS Singapore and King's College London. You can see him on Twitter. His sharp comments are out there for everyone to see. I'm going to begin with you, Nidhi. What do you think is the purpose behind sending these delegations, and what do you think has been achieved?
Well, as far as the purpose is concerned, I think, as is, to be very honest, true of this government, a lot of it has to do with managing the narrative and the appearances and doing your propaganda in a sense. So it looked good on paper, that you're sending MPs across party lines in different delegations to all these countries, in a way projecting a united front, that India is united when it comes to the issue of terrorism. And I think to a large extent that is true, that, all of us got behind the government, got behind those who were victims of this horrific attack in Pahalgam, and condemned it unequivocally. But whether it actually achieved anything, I think, is the big question mark. Because I personally, having covered, Indian diplomacy for 25 years now, have never seen India so diplomatically isolated as it is at the moment, and I feel that's extremely unfortunate. We don't seem to have very many friends in the international community who've been willing to stick their necks out unequivocally, condemning Pakistan for its state-sponsored terrorism against India. Whether you look at countries in our neighborhood, the Americans are not only taking credit for the ceasefire repeatedly, with no less than President Trump doing it, but they're also actively wooing the Pakistanis. One does wonder what this delegation or these delegations were able to achieve at the end of the day, if you don't really have anyone really standing in your corner the way the Chinese do with the Pakistanis. Even the Russians aren't standing in your corner in that way.
And why do you think that is the case? I mean, I saw the comments of this U.S. General, the Central Command Chief, in which he describes actually Pakistan as a phenomenal partner in counter-terrorism efforts. So does this reflect, I mean, our relationship with the United States, Nidhi, is supposed to be the closest one. So does this sort of reflect where we actually stand with the United States?
I think part of the problem, Amit, and you know this, is that America, I think, leads the world when it comes to hypocritical foreign policy, and double standards in their foreign policy approach. So, in fact, when President Biden was doing his democracy summits, I laughed because the Americans are very happy to deal with autocrats and dictators, whether it's the Saudis or the Venezuelans, when it suits them, and then pretend that they stand for democracy elsewhere. So look, America is doing whatever it is doing for its own interest, and that's, I think, true of countries the world over. That it's transactional. Diplomacy is not based on ideology or morality. It's based on what can benefit your country at that point. And I think the lesson for India in all of this is that we're on our own. We have a legitimate grievance against Pakistan and what it has done to this country for decades, bleeding us through state sponsored terrorism. But we're not going to be able to depend on the international community to have our backs when it comes to the crunch. I think that's what this episode should have taught us. And there may be different ways to approach this going forward, which I'm sure we can talk about in a bit.
Yeah. Angshuman, I want to bring you into the discussion here. And we saw in 1999 that India did not go up the escalation ladder. In a recent interview to me, the then DGMO in '99, he told us that for Frontline actually that the government, the army's choice at that time was not to clear the Kargil heights first, but to occupy other areas in POK. Also, there was a lot of pressure on from the Indian Air Force to hit back in May '99 when India lost those two MiGs at that time. Prime Minister Vajpayee did not use that option at that time. He kept the operations confined to that area, and he did not allow any of our fighter jets to cross the line of control. In 2008, when India suffered from the attacks in Bombay, at that time we saw that many of the options which are today available to Prime Minister Modi were available to Prime Minister Manmohan Singh also. But we didn't use that at that time. It won us a lot of international support. On this occasion, as Nidhi rightly pointed out, we have that evidence of terrorism emanating from Pakistan. But we chose to exercise a conventional response to a terrorist strike. Do you think that that is what has isolated us in the rest of the world? Anshuman, I think your mic is off.
Apologies for that.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for having me here, Amit. I think what happened this time is, you could say in many ways it's like a logical conclusion or progression from what we have been seeing in the last few years. You could talk about, in that sense, you could talk about the 2019 surgical strike, cross-border surgical strike after Uri, or the Balakot airstrike after 2019. So I think, we see that the Modi government has tried to put together this doctrine of, highly interventionist and kind of bellicose doctrine of crossing the border every time there's a Pakistan-sponsored militant attack in the Kashmir Valley or anywhere else in Jammu and Kashmir. And I think that's why it's pushed itself into this strategic corner from where it always has to escalate, right? And because this time the nature of the attack in Pahalgam was different from the previous instances in Pulwama or in Uri, which was in this particular instance, the attack was against civilian targets. That's why I think there was a added strategic burden on the Modi government to escalate. And I think that is one of the reasons why, the Modi government also chose to send this delegation outside, because it knew that it had, it had escalated, it had climbed up the escalation ladder in a way that it hadn't before. And so there was this sudden alarm throughout the world, certainly in the region, that, okay, what's happening? Is this going to spiral into a wider geopolitical conflict or wider South Asia-wide conflict? And that's why also I think there was this, sense that there's a need to explain India's position to the outside world. But, it also comes back to the question, and we have to ask this, that did the Modi government send this delegation outside because the Indian position was, not self-evident? And if it wasn't self-evident, then why was it not self-evident? Is there a problem there? Did the government not invest enough, you could say, diplomatic assets in the last few years, making India's position on Pakistan and Pakistan-sponsored terrorism across the border evident to the world? Did India lose that critical time that now it had to send this delegation outside to almost, in a way, combatively defend its position, diplomatic position? So I think this is linked, as you said, as you rightly said, it's linked to the escalation ladder, this dramatic escalation ladder that we've seen this time.
And what is your sense? I mean, the little feedback that I get, these MPs who went, they were asked a number of questions also, In fact, some of the delegations were even asked about India's silence on Palestine. So I'm not going to go there because our subject is not that. But there were a lot of questions posed to these parliamentarians, which perhaps is a good learning experience for them. But getting back to this issue, I mean, the world has always believed, especially after Osama bin Laden was found in Abbottabad, living there peacefully for a long time. So, what is the need to corner Pakistan on terror? It's not that these countries are saying that Pakistan does not sponsor terrorism. It's just that they're saying that we have relations with them and we have to deal with them too.
So yes, that is a reality of geopolitics, right? It's not a zero sum game. That the world believes this country is good and that country is evil, and every country, particularly the West, operates on this hard nosed calculation of strategic interests. And it is a reality that the West has had a very strong strategic relationship with Pakistan for decades now. So much so that even the Osama incident could not derail that relationship. Um, Initially, the West saw Pakistan as a partner in counterterrorism, and now it probably sees, particularly the US, sees Pakistan as a pivot in this renewed geopolitical competition or great power competition against China, and that relationship is going to remain, right? And India also has to realize that that can be dealt separately from other issues. That India's relationship with the West is equal. The West equally values India's relationship with India. So it's not in binaries like this or that, right? So in my view, this constant sort of attempt, or in many ways this obsessive attempt to corner Pakistan at the global stage is counterproductive for India's interests. It distracts from issues that India can really focus on.
Nidhi, we have a question which has come from Avinash Kumar, and he's asking, how did these multi-party delegations strengthen India's stand against Pakistan-funded terrorism? That question I'm going to direct to you, Nidhi.
Yeah, Avinash, I'll just answer your question in a moment. I just want to slightly disagree with Anshuman on this point about, India obsessing over Pakistan internationally. I understand what you're trying to say. Actually, I think in the last few years, India has been far less obsessed with Pakistan, frankly, to the point where we barely have a relationship with the neighboring country. I think this terror attack was a huge inflection point, and I also believe that while obviously geopolitics is rooted in pragmatism and reality and transactional, what is the reality for every country and their strategic relationship with Pakistan, it's also important to make Pakistan accountable for this kind of state sponsored terrorism. And whether that has to be done through militarily, we can disagree, agree, or what that level of escalation should be. But whether it is at the Financial Action Task Force, an IMF loan, etc. I mean, today Pakistan is chairing the United Nations Security Council Taliban Sanctions Committee. It's also the vice chairman of the Counter-Terrorism Committee. So it makes the United Nations a joke, frankly. Is there going to be no accountability of the Pakistani state for its role in what it does? And the West looks conveniently the other way, because if as long as the Pakistanis are dealing with the TTP and groups that affect them, they're okay with it. But we know Hafiz Saeed and Masood Azhar have sanctuaries within Pakistan, and there is no accountability for that. So I think it is very important to have
Right.
that accountability.
Yeah.
I just want to make one
Yeah.
quick second point, Amit,
Yeah.
which is that I mean, I'm no military expert, but my sense was that the moment India went from striking terror camps across the border to hitting military targets, this became less about Pahalgam and the terror attack in India, and more an India Pakistan issue, conflict, nuclear war, all the sort of problem issues that the West sees as far as the subcontinent is concerned. And it rang alarm bells around the world. Immediately, we got hyphenated with Pakistan again. So the focus shifted away from Pahalgam and became about India and Pakistan. So I think, to answer Avinash's question, I don't know whether sending these multi-party delegations strengthened anything. I think, yes, I agree with Anshuman that it was in a way to explain India's case about why we did what we did. And again, I agree with Anshuman. Then what was your diplomacy doing all these years? Why did you have to give an explanation? Should these countries not have seen this coming, and why India needed to do what it did?
Right. Uh, we await more questions, but Anshuman, I want to come to you. especially on the issue of the United States. We have invested so much, and I come back, we have invested so much in this relationship, whether it is the Congress party, whether it is the BJP. And then you see a US general, come out in the open and say this. So does that reflect in some ways that the military is probably more powerful under Donald Trump? Many commentators believe the US military has always been powerful, and the general is very happy that when this particular ISISK individual was captured, the general says that Asim Munir was the first to call me and say I am willing to extradite him. So Pakistanis have a long history of dealing with the United States. They know how to deal with the United States. So is it that we have invested in the wrong place as far as isolationism is concerned? Because the US also knows when to play Pakistan and when to play India.
Right. This is actually, I wanted to clarify this point, Nidhi, and this is related to what you asked. The point that I had made was specifically with relation to isolating Pakistan and less about holding Pakistan accountable, which is actually a goal that India should focus on. But my argument was in the sense that this obsession over isolating Pakistan distracts us from other more effective ways to hold Pakistan accountable, because Pakistan, the reality of geopolitics is such that it'll be extremely difficult for India to isolate Pakistan from the global system. And the events of the last few days, or rather last few weeks, has shown that very clearly. And Amit, this is related to what you asked, right? Be it Michael Kurila, the Central Command Chief, general, and Paul Kapoor, who's soon going to be the Trump administration South Asia hand. The comments that they have made shows in many ways the resilience of the US-Pakistan relationship, right? Which I would say seems to be becoming even stronger under the Trump administration, likely because of American interests to ensure or counterbalance Chinese presence in Pakistan. And there's no, and I think the thinking in DC right now is that we've got to work with Pakistan to make sure that China doesn't have a complete foothold in that part of the world, right? Least of all with respect to Afghanistan, because US does see Pakistan as a frontline state, frontline partner against hostile parties in Afghanistan, and of course Pakistan also shares a border with Iran, and we know what's happening there, right? So in that sense, I think New Delhi, it would serve New Delhi's interests to recognize this inevitable geopolitical realities and work with those, rather than sort of kind of ignoring and bypassing those realities. So yeah, I think this is what it is at the moment.
Right. Nidhi, I want to come back to one point that you had made in the beginning about the purpose of the delegations and their domestic aspect. I mean, these delegations that have traveled, there was a lot of, hand-wringing between the Congress and the BJP on its constitution also. And it, appeared to be that the TMC, for instance, pulled out one person and said that only us, the nominees that we sent. Do you think all this detracted from the purpose of the delegations? And is it, in a way, the Modi government politically dissipating the opposition domestically?
So that's an interesting question, because I think politically there are two parts to this. I think one, you project this. It's ironic that a political party that has an aversion towards the minority community, Muslims, let me be honest, had to depend on Asaduddin Owaisi, to be one of those leading from the front to speak for India. And it's all very well to project a united face to the world. Politically and religiously, but I think we need to do a little more reflection on how we're treating our own people at home, and that's a separate point. On the composition of the delegation itself, politically, I actually thought this was a great opportunity for the Congress, which is the principal pan-India opposition party, to kind of take a march on the BJP on the nationalism card. In the beginning, I think the way they handled their reaction to Sindoor and everything that happened was brilliant, because they didn't fall into the 2019 Balakot trap. They didn't question, the impact of the strikes, etc. Because if there's one card that Mr. Modi plays brilliantly, it is the nationalism card. And the Congress was on the right track. But the moment Shashi Tharoor became sort of the face of one of these delegations, it exploded. And I think, frankly, you're right, because it exposed the weaknesses, the divisions, the differences within the Congress. It made the Congress look petty and petulant. And they started training their guns on Tharoor instead of focusing on what the mission of the delegations should have been. So that quickly unraveled. The TMC was smarter in how it handled it, because they got their way, they got their nominee, and Abhishek Banerjee's speech in Japan was widely circulated and praised, even by the ruling party. And by the way, it says something that it is your opposition MPs that had some of the most the strongest arguments on Pakistan sponsored terrorism in these delegations. That, in fact, the opposition should have turned this around to say, look, you needed our guys and we stood by you. But then it just degenerated into this, well, we wanted XYZ, why did you take Tharoor, and all of that. So I think politically it's actually played really well for the BJP and for Mr. Modi, because it's also shifted the focus away from the security failures in Pahalgam and why this happened at all in the first place, and it's gone and shifted into something completely different.
Anshuman, one thing I wanted to ask you on the domestic front is that we saw Prime Minister Modi meeting all the delegation members upon their return from abroad. We also saw, I think, either one or two all-party meetings which were presided over by Rajnath Singh. The Prime Minister himself did not come and preside over any of these meetings. He did not meet any all-party leaders himself. Why do you think that's the case? Is he trying to say that, I'm above all this, but yet he chooses to meet these delegation members? Is that to score a political point?
Your mic.
Yeah. Anshuman, your mic.
I'm so sorry. So yeah, it's impossible to know what's going on in his head. But I think I pretty much agree with what you just said, which is, there is a sense, and this is something that we have seen in other issues also, which is that, he does not tend to, the Prime Minister doesn't tend to sort of micromanage things in many ways. That's the sense that he tries to give, that he would be there as a big figure, as a kind of ritualistic presence in the big meetings. And when there's a all party meeting which is well photographed, well publicized. And we saw, I was actually looking at the news cycle after he met the all party delegation, and the Operation Sindoor all-party delegation news cycle was inundated by that meeting. Almost across the board, it was just the Prime Minister's meeting with the all-party squad, and as if nothing had happened, nothing else had happened. The details of the all-parties meetings with the foreign delegations remain sketchy. So I think the Prime Minister knows very well. As also Nidhi said, he knows how to place the nationalism card. He also knows how to place himself in the media cycle in a very, very strategic manner, right? And there is also sense, I think, by outsourcing the smaller meetings to his subordinates like the defense minister and others. I think there is also he also tries to give the sense that the system is involved, Raj's system is involved, and that he would be reserved only for the grander engagements in many ways. His presence.
Well, I'm sorry we are moving between domestic and international, but I think this is the nature of the webinar. So I want to take one question, which I want to direct to you, Anshuman. It's a question from Prasad Iyer. And he asks, does India need to act like Israel in future to deter terrorist attacks?
That's a good question. I've actually written an entire piece on this a few months back. Not particularly on this, but this was after, charges, very serious charges of extrajudicial assassinations by India and Canada that Canada leveled against India. And at the time, I had argued that this is a strategy that India should not follow. And this is linked to Israel because, this is kind of the Mossad CIA style of doing things. Israel's counterinsurgency, counterterrorism doctrine is very specific, which is it is based largely on preemptive strikes and taking the enemy out before it can strike you, right? In addition to, of course, what we have seen, the horrific events that we have seen in Gaza over the last 1.5 years now, of carpet bombing, blanket strikes, etc. But the Mossad style, the Israel style of doing things is that you take out your enemies abroad in foreign soil before they can take you out at home in many ways. And we are seeing this kind of preemptive strikes once again in the last 2 days in Iran, in the last 1 day, in fact, in Iran. What it calls preemptive strikes, right? So I think Israel has a certain geopolitical leverage, most importantly, the backing of the US-led Western alliance, which India does not have, right? So it's very, very dangerous, and it's a slippery slope for India to, do things in the style of Israel. And more importantly, the context of India-Pakistan is very different. Pakistan has a major military power backing it in the region, which is China, with which India shares a disputed border and an active border dispute, like disputed border and a very hot border dispute at the moment. So I think it would be extremely counterproductive, to answer in short, for India to adopt the Israeli counterinsurgency or Israeli international security doctrine.
Staying on this theme, I want to bring Nidhi in here. We've seen, you rightly pointed to individuals like Masood Azhar and Hafiz Saeed, who are known for directing terrorist operations against India and who are on Pakistani soil. We all know also what agencies do, try to do, or don't do. But we have also seen a phenomena of late, where our own Prime Minister says कि India अब घर में घुस के मारता है. So does this not take away from, deniability of covert actions? Because, a terrorist militant being killed in Pakistan, there could be myriad agencies, from the ISI to other militant groups to Shia outfits, Sunni outfits. So does this make any sense to take credit for what might be covert actions in Pakistan today?
Yeah, but that's the nature of the BJP's politics. And I think part of the problem that we're seeing today with our sort of challenges on the foreign policy front is that the political rhetoric that the BJP has wound itself up in on Pakistan and on terrorism, etc., is what is, in a sense, kind of escalation we saw. We now have a new threshold. We have a new template, right? A new blueprint in how we deal with terror attacks. And I'm from Kashmir, so when we sit there and we see the drones coming in and the firing taking place, it's real. It's very easy to sit in Chennai or Delhi or Calcutta or somewhere and not really know the impact of this. And the thing is that when we get caught up in our own political rhetoric, then when the Prime Minister and the government of India say that now future terror attacks will immediately involve a retaliation, what is the threshold of that? Is it a Pahalgam style? Is it like if two security men are shot and killed, are you going to go and attack Pakistani military bases? Um, uh, you know, come what may, based on how small or big an attack might be. So we are in a constant state of escalation now, and I think the political rhetoric is part of the problem. It's exactly like Anshuman said, because you did the surgical strikes, you made a big deal out of that. You made a big deal out of these operations. So now, when something awful has happened, you have to be seen to be acting. If nothing else, to be seen to be retaliating, and then you suddenly stopped and you pulled back. So in this case also, yeah, I mean, if you're serious about covert operations, you shouldn't really be saying ki ghar ke ghus ke marenge, because then you're negating the whole idea of why you're doing these covert operations. But I think with politics getting mixed up in all of this, it's complicated everything.
Nidhi, we have a question from Rohan Bhende. And Rohan Bhende is asking, why did the delegations prioritize meetings with lawmakers, think tanks, and diaspora communities over direct engagement with senior government officials in some countries, such as the junior minister meeting in Doha?
See, I don't think that was a bad idea because I think government to government, or one hopes that at least government to government, we do have contact with these countries. I think most of them or all of them are members of the Security Council, which explains why the list was the way that it was. But I think it's very important actually to engage with other opinions in another country. So whether that's through think tanks and other lawmakers, opposition leaders, those who can influence opinion, who have a say, who are not within the government framework, as it were. I think that was actually a good thing to do, and in that sense, I think that was a smart move by India, not just to confine it to government level.
Right. Anshuman, there's a question from Aftab Abdul Qadir, and he asks, how would the new novel avert India from its earlier notions of peace diplomacy? I think what Mr. Kader probably is saying is that how does this new normal sit with India's previous positions of promoting peace, and we were active at one time in doing all this? I think that's the question, interesting question from Aftab Abdul Qadir.
Yes, very interesting question indeed. And here I completely also agree with Nidhi in terms of, it seems to be the case that India is now in a constant state of escalation. And where is the threshold, right? What decides what kind of action, military action, India is going to take now? Right, and at what point? And this is actually a contradiction now, what I see if you zoom out and look at it, because we have the prime minister going around the world, especially in the Ukraine Russia context, talking about peace, right? And saying things like this is not an era of war, which is a good thing to say, right? And also proposing peace diplomacy and conflict mediation between Russia and Ukraine, and in other contexts. During the G20 also, I think we saw a push, this narrative that India is a force for good in the world. This new normal, which is a constant state of war almost, I think does disservice to that right narrative, or that peace-centric narrative, or constructive narrative that India itself, that the Modi government itself has tried to build over the last few years. And it could come back to haunt us in the sense that if India chooses to remain at a constant state of war or combat in its own region, then what locus standi does it have to go around the world sermonizing about peace and conflict mediation, right? So we lose ground. We tend to lose ground on that. And I think, as Nidhi also said, it's kind of a slippery slope position, right? Because it risks lighting a fire at any point of time. This new normal that the Prime Minister very clearly hinted on in his speech, in his televised address that he made recently. So it does disservice to India's Nehruvian legacy of peace diplomacy, and not in a good way, I'm afraid.
We have another question, an interesting question from Win Part, and this person asks, should India involve the West or resolve issues with Pakistan more efficiently through bilateral means? Nidhi, that one I'm going to throw at you. What is your sense? I mean, should it be done bilaterally with Pakistan, or should we involve international players?
Look, Amit, you know this as well as I do. As journalists, we've covered the India-Pakistan saga now for decades, and I've always been someone who has batted for dialogue, and finding some kind of resolution sitting across the table rather than ghar ke ghus ke marna and all that. But I have to ask this question today: what is the point? I mean, the point is, if you talk to a civilian government in Pakistan, that government is not the one that's really calling the shots. Now, we have had contact with the Pakistani army and the army chief in the past. And I think to that extent, it did help, particularly with the ceasefire along the line of control. And even when that was under threat some years ago, having that direct line to the army there helped in sort of cooling tempers. So I think that basic level of engagement needs to remain even now. But I think when you talk about an India-Pakistan dialogue today, who are you going to talk to and what is it going to resolve? You have an army chief in Pakistan today who is so rabid and so rabidly anti-India and obviously extremely reckless that I don't know where this would go. So I have turned into frankly a bit of a skeptic on this. I don't think involving the West, as I said earlier, I think we're on our own. So the question is there any other way that we can make Pakistan accountable, whether it is the Indus Waters Treaty, renegotiating that probably is the biggest weapon that we have right now that works in our favor. But in the long run, at this point, I'm a little more pessimistic about even a bilateral dialogue with Pakistan.
Well, this is a question which is going to dog us, and there's no doubt that India retains its sort of anathema to involving the West. And you would recall that Marco Rubio in his tweet announcing the ceasefire had talked about India and Pakistan engaging on dialogue on a broad set of issues, which hasn't happened, or if at all it happens, it will happen perhaps in a secret setting and we won't get to know, which is what has been the story, right now for some time of India-Pakistan relations.
But Amit, can I briefly interrupt there to say that I actually think that is the only way you can have a dialogue with Pakistan, which is completely back channel, out of the media's glare. The moment the media starts reporting on this story, it is a tamasha. It's extremely reductive. And I am hoping actually that sensible voices on either side are in touch quietly, and we never get to know about it.
Right.
So
There's one sensible voice asking a question, and this sensible voice is from Priti Sharma, and she says, "What happens? What is next to Sindoor operation? I mean, I guess what else?" And she says, "Is it right to take aggressive steps against the neighbor? How does India maintain a good relationship with the neighbor after this?" I mean, there are voices of peace, and, of doing things differently. Nidhi rightly points out that, they often don't work. But I would like you, Angshuman, to address Preeti's question.
Amit, one thing that and this is related to the question and also what Nidhi said. Uh, the other day, I was in this meeting where we were lamenting the almost complete disappearance of India-Pakistan track twos or track 1.5s, which used to be a thing earlier. Be it the Nimrana dialogue, the Chow Fry dialogue, etc. Those things seem to have disappeared behind the veil in the last few years, right? And this is quite regrettable, I would say. In the current geopolitical context or the strategic context of India-Pakistan, track to seem almost laughable because positions have hardened on both sides of the border. But in the medium to long term, I think track 2s and track 1.5s, which would include behind closed door discussions, reviving them is extremely important to reset this relationship. Because Amit, ultimately, we cannot wish away Pakistan. They are our neighbors. It's a geographical fact, right? We cannot delete Pakistan from the region, right? So we have to deal with Pakistan in some way, and it cannot happen by this constant state of combat and anxiety. And as we have seen, the first consequence of any conflict is borne by the people who live along this border. So we have to also think about them, right, on both sides of the border. So in that sense, I think to reset this relationship, we have to be audacious and imaginative in the longer term.
I just want to add that, Preeti's question, how does India maintain a good relationship with the neighbor after this? I mean, the neighbor is killing your own citizens. The neighbor should also have some shame and sense of responsibility about what it is doing. And it is outrageous. I'm not one for war. I'm not one for. I'm pretty clear on that. I'm not one for escalation. But the ball can't only be in India's court. I think
I
that.
think, Nidhi, the spirit of the question was, to take a, more dial. I mean, I understand where you're coming from. I think that was probably the spirit of the question in which it was asked, because I think that, with drones and missiles and, everything all over the world, I think all of us are probably, getting sucked into this. And we saw what happened in Pahalgam. It was horrific.
Absolutely.
And
But I think, sorry, another important point is that we need to take a step back and look at our own security failures. It shouldn't have happened in the first place. This is a major tourist attraction destination. There were inputs of an attack imminent. Probably they thought in Srinagar or in some hotel. But Pahalgam is a major tourist destination. Pahalgam town was well protected. This place was not. So at some point we have to come out of this. We can't ask questions. We can't ask questions because we have to. We have to. So
I think that's a very important point you make, Nidhi. That forget an intelligence failure, there was a security failure. That there were no security personnel deployed there. And I think it's really important to ask these hard questions of our government. That what are we doing internally to deal with these issues? Because at the end of the day, we know that those terrorists who perpetrated that atrocity in Pahalgam have still not been apprehended.
Exactly. So I think it's time to shift the focus and look inwards. And enough time has passed for us. I think that grace period is over, where we can turn the lens a little inwards and say, okay, we messed up. We have to make sure this doesn't happen again. And how do we do that? What went wrong? Fix the gaps. There has to be accountability, but then that is another dirty word in the last 10, 11 years. There is no accountability.
Well, we have quite a few questions coming in, and uh, I think it's clear that the general sense is that India's ability to explain itself, to come out. These are questions which are bothering everyone, and Nidhi, there's a lot of questions about how India has not been able to influence the IMF to do anything. I mean, would you take that? I mean, is it anyone's case that India can influence international institutions so easily? Is that the line that the Modi government has sold to our people, and they're believing it? Just as they believed that Kashmir was a terribly safe, place to visit after all that had happened.
Well, absolutely. We always have the government telling us what a Vishwa Guru we are internationally. So then again, that's part of the political rhetoric that you get caught up in. And look, when it comes to organizations like the IMF, there is this sort of deep-rooted psychological fear amongst countries in the West that you cannot destabilize it economically because they've got nuclear weapons. And yes, there are bad guys in their system, but there are even worse guys who are non-state actors or semi-state actors who might get hold of those weapons, and then you'll have Armageddon, right? So that influences a lot of the decisions of these multilateral bodies like the IMF, but it also exposes your own weaknesses and being able to convince them otherwise. And again, you're caught up in the political rhetoric that you're so great and you have this great relationship with all these powers and so much influence. But in the middle of this, they got that big IMF loan. And I personally think that because of the timing, and that was just a coincidence, but that I think emboldened the Pakistanis and their response to our actions.
Right. Angshuman, we have a question from Shwetanshu Kumar. And Shwetanshu is asking, India has isolated itself in its neighborhood with Pakistan, China, and Yunus in Bangladesh. India cannot count on the support of the West and USA while Russia, our long-time supporter, is at war itself. So, what would India do if things go south after another terrorist attack? I think that's the sum and substance of the question.
Yeah, it's a very ominous question indeed, because one thing that was made amply clear this time was that I don't think India has any major military backer to rely on. If a future terrorist attack emanating from Pakistani soil or linked to Pakistani actors happens and leads to a far greater escalation and spillover than we have seen this time, then probably India would be in trouble at that time. And precisely because Pakistan, the fact is that Pakistan does seem to have a major military backer in China, and there is evidence to show that China provided active intelligence to Pakistan during the escalation this time, including in aerial reconnaissance and satellite imagery. I don't think India received that level of intelligence from its strategic partners or strategic allies, least of all its quad partners, right? And this is one thing that I want to talk about. In the last few years, in the diplomatic circles and strategic analysis circles, we have heard a lot about this, minilateral diplomacy, plurilateral diplomacy, Indo-Pacific diplomacy that India has been doing. And the Quad, which is, India, Japan, Australia, and US, has been talked about so much that India has this kind of new strategic umbrella that it can rely on to expand its footprint in the region. But ultimately, most discussions on when we talk about international diplomacy and security, it boils down to this question: what happens when there's a shooting war? Who will stand with you when there's a shooting war, right? And the prospects that we have seen during Operation Sindoor are bleak in that sense. So I think there is time still for India to think about this seriously and think about what kind of support system India wants to build. Because the truth is that India is still not a great power in the sense of the United States or China. It is towards the upper rung. It's an aspirational great power, and which puts it in a very awkward in-between spot. And that's why it has to sort of play the cards very well. And to be honest, the position that the Modi government finds itself geopolitically is very delicate. It's not an easy position to navigate. But Operation Sindoor and the geopolitical environment of Operation Sindoor should have very critical lessons for the government, that next time it happens, what are the security guarantees that India has, right, to protect itself and the larger region.
We have a question from Pranshu Sharma, Nidhi. And Pranshu is asking, what role has the Indian and international media played in shaping the narrative around Operation Sindoor? And how might this influence future diplomatic engagement? I think that's a question for you, Nidhi.
Well, I'm embarrassed. What do I say? I'm embarrassed that I once worked in the Indian broadcast space, because it's a joke. And what these people on television in particular don't realize is that when you do this kind of hysterical, non-factual, actually blatantly false coverage of something like this, you are hurting India's case in the international community. And I don't know whether the MPs actually were faced with questions about this. But when the Indian media lies and puts out propaganda, unverified information, it takes videos from past conflicts, and it takes videos of Israeli strikes somewhere and passes them off as Indian. Uh, you hurt the credibility of your own profession, yourself, and your country's case to the world. So that is the role, I think, that as far as the domestic Indian broadcast media in particular is concerned, that is there. Secondly, as far as the international media is concerned, I think the problem, Amit, is that a lot of the Western press in particular has a very sort of narrow view with which it looks at India and India Pakistan relations. And I do have a problem with that. I think there are certain preconceived notions that they have about the subcontinent. I feel the Pakistanis are very good at maintaining relations with the media. With what our multi party delegations of MPs did is something the Pakistanis have been doing for years. They're really good with the press, and how they're able to communicate their narrative. And we sort of realized that much later. And at least we had some of our more articulate ambassadors and high commissioners, etc., on Western television, putting India's case forward. We need to do more of that. But I do think that there is a certain tinted veil with which the Western media in particular looks at India, which doesn't necessarily make their reporting. And we've seen that in how they've covered Israel and Gaza. Come on. You can see their
We
pro-Israel
also
bias.
have the Modi government being very tough with some international media representatives, canceling visas, sending some
And that's
journalists
not the
home,
right approach. That's not the right approach. No.
raiding the BBC office. I mean, this doesn't help you win friends,
It
I would
doesn't.
imagine.
It doesn't at all. I mean, there is a reason why we rank so badly in the Press Freedom Index, right? And the government may say it doesn't care, but it's been lobbying for years to get that ranking up. But the moment you raid, media offices, and where I used to work and what happened to NDTV, right? So it doesn't help. It doesn't give you any credibility by doing that. That's not the point. So you may disagree with how the New York Times or the Washington Post covers India, but that doesn't mean you go and you go and rate them. You have to put forward your case with evidence, and you have to counter that narrative. But as I said, the domestic Indian media is not helping India's case at all. In fact, it is hurting it.
Right. Angshuman, we have a question from Soham Day. And again, I'm sorry to throw such large open-ended questions at you, but here it is. Mr. Day is asking, is America a dependable ally?
Yeah, there is a very old saying, which is that America doesn't have friends, only allies. And it kind of shows and nothing has changed. It kind of shows how carefully powers, particularly in the global South, need to deal with America. The short answer is this: that no, America is not a dependable ally for India, right? Because of the particular, and Trump has made it amply clear this particular point, and I can't emphasize enough, right? For the US, India serves a very specific purpose at the moment, which is a strategic bulwark against China, right? This has been the context of the last 1 decade or so. As long as India is ready to serve that purpose, America will continue to sort of entertain Delhi from its own spectrum of narrow interests, right? The other reason also probably is that India offers this huge market, including this consumer market for American goods, American military hardware also, right? So I think in that sense there is this very narrow kind of tunnel vision way in which Washington DC looks at India, and India has to be conscious of that. But once again, I'm going back to what happened in Operation Sindoor because it is very illustrative, right? The United States not just refused to clearly stand with India. Forget about providing military, direct military aid or intelligence, but also frame the India-Pakistan dispute as some kind of, in a very ridiculous way, 5,000 year or 1,000 year dispute or generational dispute. And if I'm not wrong, even the U.S. State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce repeated that line few days back in our press briefing, that it's a generational dispute that U.S. has been trying to mediate. So, if that is the framing, then on this particular specific issue of India-Pakistan, I don't think India can rely on the US. And once again, I would say that in the last few years, India has tried to expand its relationship with the US, not least by, we saw the energy that came up after Modi's last visit to the United States last year, but also within this quadrilateral security dialogue framework. Despite all of that, we didn't see any kind of clear support for India's position when it mattered the most.
Okay, picking up from that, Harshit Roy has a question, and his question is: in this era, any relation is based on its merit. Nobody is all-weather friend. In this sense, does India need to carve out its own policy? Nidhi, I think that's one for you.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was saying. That the only one who seems to have an all-weather friend, unfortunately, is Pakistan, and that too China, who's flanking us on the other side of the border. So that is something, as Anshuman pointed out, is something that is a huge disadvantage to us. But I think we're on our own. We are on our own. Even the Russians are not firmly in our corner, and we just have to carve out our own way. I think another thing to do, I mean, in terms of the way forward and what can be done, is you need, instead of having this sort of bombastic foreign policy that is often lecturing the world on how it should look at India, go and make your case quietly in various capitals. Give them the evidence. A lot of the countries have the evidence, but whatever you've been able to gather in terms of specifics on Pahalgam, for example, give them specifics on that, and do it quietly, do it behind the scenes, work the phones that way, and at the same time, just be prepared to know that the next time something happens and something hits the fan, you're on your own, and that's how it's going to be. You can't really depend on anybody. But
Well,
they've got China. Remember
yeah.
that.
Well, I guess Russia did play that role in India's foreign policy for a long time. I mean, its record on vetoing so many UN resolutions on Kashmir and on other issues of concern to India is there. But then, of course, India moved away. Successive prime ministers probably felt that the Americans were a better bet, and so the Russians also are building a relationship with Pakistan, and they are even supporting BRICS membership. So all that is probably for another day. But Anshuman, we have
Amit, can I add my bit to that question? Just
Yeah.
one small bit, which is that it's an interesting question. The phrase that do we need to carve out our own sort of policy? And
Yeah.
one thing that we have heard from the Modi government's foreign policy apparatus in the last few years is this term repeated ad nauseum: strategic autonomy, right? Which you could say is a refashioning of Nehruvian non-alignment. And we have been told that India
But
is
isn't that
trying
a
to
myth?
carve.
But
That's
aren't
what I'm
we
saying.
strongly in the American camp? I mean, isn't that a myth, Anshuman?
That's what I'm coming to, which is that it looks like non-alignment, but it is far from what non-alignment was, which in my view, non-alignment was an independent foreign policy, but with a strong set of principles backing it. And those principles manifested in different ways. For example, on the 2003 US invasion of Iraq, our foreign minister at the time, Yashwant Singh, clearly said that it goes against our principle to support the American invasion, let alone by contributing troops to the alliance forces in Iraq. There was a time when Delhi used to talk about morality, principles, while maintaining this kind of policy of not aligning with any bloc. But even as you said, even then it was kind of a misnomer. Even during the period of non-alignment, we were tilted towards the Soviet Union in some ways, not least on the front of military hardware. On the front of strategic autonomy, we have been told that we have an independent foreign policy, but we also have these contradictory voices from within the system which say that no, we need to ally stronger with the United States now. And we
Right.
keep seeing that over and over
Before I
again.
go to this question, I'm going to ask Nidhi: is there a place you think for principle in foreign policy?
I wish there was, because it's actually very disappointing when India can't even vote for a ceasefire in Gaza and what's happening there. And unfortunately, I think the realities of geopolitics are such today that that's not the case anymore. I don't think there is much place for morality in international politics and international diplomacy any longer. We're way past that.
Well, there is
But
one
not
question from,
anyone.
yeah, there's one question I want to take from Avinash Kumar. And I think from your perch, Angshuman, you are better placed to answer this. And it reads, how should India diplomatically confront the emerging China, Pakistan, Bangladesh alliance within South Asian geopolitics?
This is an interesting trifecta that has been proposed. I mean, has been asked about, which is that China, Pakistan. It's easier to answer. When you add Bangladesh to the mix, it's a little more complicated. And this language of confrontation, I think, has to be diversified, if not changed entirely. Right? We don't need to confront everything, but we need to work around these things, right? And we have to remember that there are governments and there are people, right? This is especially to do with Bangladesh. One of the strategic mistakes, in my opinion, that India made, and others have written about this too, that India made in Bangladesh, for example, was that it put all its eggs in one basket, right? For the longest time, India also did that in Myanmar. In Bangladesh's case, it put all its eggs in the Awami League basket. In the process, it alienated large sections of the civil society and the younger population who were very, very disenchanted with the Sheikh Hasina government, not least because of its authoritarian attitudes, right? And when things hit the roof last year, India was left in the lurch, right? It didn't know what to do. So I think a very good option, a good way to confront, if I may, going by the language of the question, confront this alliance would be to sort of preempt and diversify our relationships across the board in these countries. But of course, as Nidhi also stated, this is far more complicated in Pakistan's case. You don't know whom to diversify the relationship, whether a genuine outreach from Indian side will be reciprocated by Pakistan. But going back to my original point, these are three countries we share
Right.
long borders with, and we can't wish them away.
Right. I have I have one question for the two of you. We are running out of time, but this is a question which I forgot to ask, so I must ask it. Nidhi, why do you think that not a single delegation was sent to any South Asian country? Why not even to Nepal or to Sri Lanka?
I don't know, and that is a thought that struck me, that one of the things that we needed to do was to get support in our own neighborhood, and we didn't. And I don't know whether that's because our relationship in the neighborhood with actually all our neighbors is pretty bad. Uh, did we not see it fit to reach out to them because the relationship isn't at its best? I don't know. This is something that mystifies me. I don't know whether Anshuman has a better idea of why.
Anshuman, have say Sri Lanka or Nepal said anything on Sindoor and India Pakistan, or has there been silence? Have you seen anything? I haven't.
I haven't.
Nepal, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Nepal lost one of its citizens in the Pahalgam attack.
And didn't say it.
Yeah.
It didn't say anything, right, on Operation Sindoor particularly. And I think Sanjay Da has made this point about neighborhood first. Since 2014, we have been hearing about neighborhood first policy, NFP. It even has an acronym, right? That India will focus on the neighborhood, and the Modi government even tried to revive SARC, etc. Right? And this is an excellent question, Amit, that you have asked. It actually shows a larger tendency and pathology within this government, which is that it has tended to take the neighborhood for granted. That come what may, it will fall in line because we are the largest power, economically, militarily in South Asia, assuming we don't count part of China or Chinese influence within the region now. But the reality is that the Chinese have made very significant and, from India's point of view, very worrying ingresses into the neighborhood. And has invested a lot of diplomatic capital in influence operations with parties, civil society, think tanks in India's neighborhood, which I feel India has not done. And India used to have excellent track-to-level relationships with civil societies in Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, etc. Right? And as Nidhi said, today the relationship looks bad with all of them. And I don't know why India did not send, despite committing to a neighborhood-first policy, any delegation to the neighborhood. It should have, I feel.
Right. I'm going to read out this, more like a comment from Sanjay Hazarika. And he says, we live in a specific neighborhood with specific problems. And the policy of neighborhood first announced years back seems to be working in reverse. Civil war in Myanmar, uncertainty in Bangladesh, and fierce opposition from Pakistan and China. Well, he asked the question, but unfortunately, we don't have time to take that question. But I'd just like to say that uh, just because a country doesn't like you or you have difficult relations with them, I think all the more reason to send delegations to these countries to explain your point of view. I mean, there was, in my view, no harm even to send a delegation to Bangladesh if they would listen to us on the points that India had to make. I think we've had a pretty fascinating discussion with lots of questions from viewers, and I would just like to take time to thank both Nidhi Razdan and Angshuman Choudhury for taking their time out and discussing the fallout from Operation Sindoor in this Frontline webinar. Thank you so much for joining us, Nidhi and Angshuman.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amit. Thanks, Nidhi.